glued to. All right.
I,
All right. So
oh,
I am here with Michelle. This is a very spontaneous live stream that I decided to do, and Michelle said that she can join. Um, I thought an interesting topic would be dating in its course of history, because I feel like dating itself isn't really something that um, just it didn't always exist.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and there's repercussions, I think, for if we study history and the way we look at dating now, and I think I want to talk about that. So,
yeah,
um, I know I talked to you about marriage. Marriage was like one of the big. I feel like it was like one of the big deciding factors of dating itself becoming a concept. Like I think people getting away from marriage is where dating started having more power in itself as a concept. Um, but I don't know. Let's see. What do you think?
yeah. I mean, dating is honestly, I want to say, and like maybe this is naive and uninformed, but it does seem to me like it's a pretty new. It's fairly new, like even our modern education system is pretty new. To be honest, I mean, it's not operated this way for the majority of human history. Um, and I thought what you said when you like shared just a couple of thoughts of like, hey Michelle, like maybe we should talk about this. When you said about how dating has become, or it seems like because it it tries to, maybe because marriage has dissolved a bit in terms of its defaultness, if that makes sense, then it's almost like dating tries to be like marriage in a sense, but it's not. And so there can be a lot of like possession and kind of ownership. I think, was that the word you used? I think it was ownership that you used. So there can be a sense of a feeling of ownership, but yet you don't, it's not the same type of ownership that would be in marriage. And I know people, that's probably why marriage has but always, or in modern times, been challenged, because people, nobody likes the idea of like owning, are you okay, sweet? Ownership, you know what I mean? so so it's like, and I get that, but there's also an element where you ownership really means like being responsible to and for. It doesn't just mean like being, dominating somebody else, or like literally owning them and, they're your slave or something like that. It's much more of a responsibility dynamic. And so I do what I think is curious is that I think dating almost, like I said, it tries to almost take the place of marriage. Or I guess what I mean to say is it's like it's often what has become more of the default than marriage on the whole, right? And it almost like in many respects I feel like it looks a lot like marriage, but it's not, because it's not like the full commitment. I mean, because it's not like you haven't made that ultimate promise, really, right? To like just a second to like be with that person. Hey, sorry, my neighbor is stopping by now. Um, sorry, just 1 second.
Yeah, you're good. You're good. You're good. She gives me thumbs up.
Am I doing a live stream with my friend Javier right now? Right on. Yeah, I missed it. Just like you can go hang out in there if you want to.
Oh, no. This is
Yeah,
great.
that's right. Grabbed it and broke it off. It's okay, even if you guys had bits of donut, I don't care. That's so sweet of you. Thank you. Yeah, we had extra. Oh yes, which that one? Yeah, that's.
This is the commercial part of the live stream.
Okay. Or 2 bar that side. Oh, nice. Do you want it? Give it back now, or you can give it back like tonight? Let's have her hold on to it. Yeah. Yeah, maybe when she takes it off tonight, you can give it to you then, okay? You guys are awesome. Just say, hey, Grace, I'm glad you're enjoying that. She said hi. She gave a hug too. Okay. Yeah. Give her a hug. Give her a hug. I thought the DVR video was long as the movie. That's good. That's good. Okay, well, we'll see you later. I'm sorry. Let's go. Sure. I see you're in a bathing suit, sweetheart. I see. We gotta go. Sorry, Heather. Were you just stopping by anyways? Nope. Just Just zip it up. Okay. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Bye, Keller. Bye. Sorry. Thank you, viewers. But I guess that's my thing. Is like dating is, it honestly it kind of looks and comports a lot like marriage, but yet it's not the ultimate commitment. And maybe some people do use it that way. So I'm not saying that can't happen, right? But I think on the whole, it has this weird sort of middle space that is very hard to navigate, and probably why it gets increasingly harder to understand what dating is over time, perhaps. You're like,
no, this is great. I mean, this is great,
okay.
and also the aspect of a spontaneous life. This really adds to the richness of a spontaneous life, you know.
This is life. This is.
But yeah, I think you nailed some good points there about, you know, uh, the idea of marriage kind of taking a back seat.
Yeah.
Now. But I think it's interesting because like I think it gets really messy now when we think about it, right? Because I think feminism has a role to play in that. Some of people's disagreements about marriage, right? Their distaste for marriage would be like, um, you know, that women had to take a certain role. Um, and I feel like that was some of the critiques that kind of maybe implicitly led into this sort of dating concept, where, you know, challenging marriage. I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's that aspect of feminism that challenged that concept. Um, but I'm not sure. I mean, very entangled.
Yeah, I think what makes it kind of particularly interesting in that respect, Javier, is that, like, I think to give dating the benefit of the doubt, it's almost like, okay, well, let's give people an opportunity to get to know each other, to, you know, maybe be able to almost like, I mean, I think you're right. Those roles being deconstructed, and challenged, which obviously I think everything is, it's great to rethink and re-understand why something is the way it is, right? But when those roles sort of deteriorate, you still kind of have this almost still a semblance of that notion going on, but it's not the same, and it's not to the same degree in its fullness, really. So I think you kind of get this interesting kind of, I was gonna say a word, but it seems so. I know, it's grandma too. T-shirts. Oh my goodness, that's awesome. So I think that it's almost like you still have a feeling of that role, but yet it's not. It's very it's like it wants to be undefined and it wants to be defined still. And you're also mixing that in with, you know, this idea of dating and relating, you know, having this relationship with this other person and what that means. I mean, I think there's a lot there with that, and that can get kind of murky. I think that when it comes to this idea that dating, I think one of the things I think is risky about this potential is that people, like I said, people truly do almost engage with the other person as if they are married, and then I feel like that makes like that could make breakups even more devastating. Like it's already going to be hard to lose somebody you really care about or really love, but you know, it's even more devastating if it was like basically it was kind of like your spouse, but it wasn't. You know, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Which I think makes the existential hardship even more difficult when it comes to this space of it's not really marriage, but it's kind of like marriage. And maybe people would be like, it's not like marriage. It's not like marriage. I don't know. Do you feel like that's fair to say, though, that people end up almost acting like they're married even though they're not?
Yeah, I think it's fair because you know, you hear this all the time, right? Like people will say like, "Well, marriage, the only difference with marriage is that it's just a piece of paper," right? People, a lot of people like to say that. You know, marriage at this point is just has like a piece of it's just a piece of paper, and maybe it comes with certain legal benefits, uh, and that's really it. But for some people, it's just those external exchanges. Um, but I think the aspect also of religion probably played a really big role in how dating is now. Um, and the reason why I look at dating so messy, the way I look at dating so messy is like, you know, a lot of people, it was like you would talk, get married, and then it would like follow the natural things would follow, like sex and all that stuff. Now it's everything happens before marriage. And then marriage kind of loses its significance to some extent. It's kind of like the last, I don't even know. It's like if everything is perfect, everything goes well, then we'll get married or something like that.
What was that last thing you said?
It basically boils down to like, oh, if everything is like perfect, um, or if it boils down to like if everything is good, then we'll get married.
Well, that's the irony, though, don't you think? Because, I mean, obviously, anything is possible. It's possible that deteriorating, or at least really challenging the structure of marriage, doing the whole dating thing, doing the whole living together thing. Yes, theoretically that can work. That can work for some people. But if you look on the whole, it's not as if that makes for, if unfortunately with the still relatively high divorce rate, and if you think about just like mental health statistics, it's not as if this makes things like way better for people, and in some respects it can make it harder, I think, because it's weird. It's almost like the idea is, like you said, it's like, okay, well, when we feel like it's good enough or it's right, or we know each other just well enough, then we can go ahead and make that decision, then make the final decision, which I guess from like, um, Daniel and I will talk about like sort of low order causality and high order causality. And on a low order causality, this is not to like compare them or make some hierarchy or judge it. It's just a matter of, yeah, on the surface that like kind of makes sense. But for some reason on the high level causality, that doesn't always pan out for some reason. I can speak to that personally, like from knowing, of course, not the people I know personally aren't everyone in the world, but for the people I know personally, it's ironically not really always led to the best outcomes. It's almost like you would think that it would be, well, now they know each other better. But the thing is, you just never know, like you will never know the person well enough, and they'll always seem to change and be different than you thought they were. And so I think that the weird thing is, it's almost like the commitment seems almost like an essential ingredient to like this kind of, it's sort of like a blind leap of faith. And it's not, and I don't mean to say that lightly, because obviously you don't want to be like, one doesn't want to just be like undiscerning when getting married or something like that. But there seems to be something to the whole it's like that Kierkegaardian type of leap of faith that's so essential to kind of having the wherewithal, if you will, to kind of withstand that for like the long run, because if it's always just about it being good, like, okay, well, now it's good, now we're good, now we know each other to a good degree, then your terms of your basically the terms you're working with is it's good, and it's not always going to be good. It's going to be hard, it's going to be wonderful, it's going to be a whole bunch of other things, but good is probably, it's so much a blend of both, that I wonder if that doesn't like make people in a character sense kind of like ready for that, if that makes any sense. It's weird, just like they're doing it to be ready, right? That's the ironic thing. It's like, we're going to live together, we're going to make sure to make sure we know each other and feel really ready for that. Now at the same time, like I think that like I said, that does make, there's a lot of a lot of ways in which that makes sense, because you do want to know the person. And I do believe that there are some people who, between the two of them, it's such a personal kind of decision between two people that they make that decision and commitment. And maybe they're not like legally married, maybe they're not married in like the conventional sense, but they've already kind of made that decision together, if that makes any sense. So I certainly don't mean to sound critical. I know people do things in very different ways, but it's basically just this concept of this strange, like I said, Kierkegaardian leap of faith, and what that says about your willingness to kind of persist in the midst of it not always being good. Does that hold?
No, that makes me think a lot, because when you said when you're talking about how people like to give a measurement to
Yeah,
a measurement of time to like how well we will know each other,
sure.
um, as the decision factor for leading to marriage.
Yeah.
I've always seen a lot of conversations like this, right? Where it's like there's, I think we've probably seen it with many of our friends, many of our acquaintances, where there's a person involved with another person, and they've been together for years, and that person is sort of waiting for the other person to ask them to marry them at this point, right? And they're actually upset over the fact, or getting frustrated maybe, that the other person hasn't actually popped the question yet. And this is always very interesting to me, because it causes a lot of turmoil in the end, right? One already wants to settle down, and the other maybe isn't sure, or I don't know, he has some other desire. But going back to the measurement of time, this is always a common question. I've seen this amongst my friends, right? We always ask each other, how long is long enough to know someone? How do we know? Is it 2 years? Is it 3 years? Um, and there's always examples to counter those many years. There's people that met and they just got along and got married instantly. Um, so there's always examples to counter the time. Some
Yeah.
some might say that those are rare, and maybe that is true, but um, there is no amount of time that is universally valid. I think that we can accept. you know, there is no time that is universally valid. So um,
Yeah.
I think dating has kind of stolen the spirit of marriage, if that makes any sense.
Ooh, I like that. I like that.
Because I mean, it makes sense to me, because now when people talk about marriage, it's only external, right? It's just a piece of paper. There's these benefits, and then there's the consequences of getting divorced, right? The legal stuff. This all are external effects that can affect someone economically, psychologically, and so on. But the
Right.
spirit of marriage itself has kind of lost its significance, and it seems like dating has stolen that spirit, where it's like, even the aspect of just talking, like the phrase "I am talking to somebody," uh, already claims some type of ownership. Ironically enough, right? I've heard some people express this, like, if I'm talking to you, I don't need you to be talking to other people, right? But they're not married. There's no. Actually, it's not even. They're not even dating. They're just talking, right? So even it
Well,
falls further than that.
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think something that comes to mind with that, Javier, is that like a lot of times too, I think that's also the consequence of people not talking about philosophical ideas. And I'm not saying they have to be talking about like Kant and Hegel and stuff. I'm just saying like talking about ideas and things that maybe, or just kind of like being okay with the silence too. We've talked about that as well. But basically I think like it's funny because now between people who could be potential partners or dating or something, like it's almost like they'd only talk to each other if they want something. Like if they only talk with each other, they only think about talk. We only think about talking at a certain age and certain sort of dynamic as, well, you must be interested in them, or they must be interested in you. And don't get me wrong, like, yes, that definitely can happen for sure. But it's weird because we've kind of put the interest on just this outcome, and not just like, well, what do we find interesting? Like, what, it's like the interest shift has happened. And so it's just about like, oh, okay, well, if you're talking to a girl, you must be interested in her. Well, maybe, but like, you might also be interested in what she's interested in. So maybe you talk about that. But like, because people don't have this stuff they talk about, like, I'm not trying to be, I know there are obviously exceptions, obviously. And there's definitely a place for small talk and just talking about the quotidian. But the thing is that if you don't have some sort of thing of like, oh, well, we're talking to kind of work out this thing, or we're talking about this interesting concept or whatever, or we're talking about sort of the meaning of like, oh, I don't know, just pick something, freedom or something, then it's like it can only ever mean that, well, you're just interested in that person. And it kind of jumps really quick. Like, sure, it might get there, like, maybe it will, that would be kind of cool, but it's like it sort of jumps really fast into, it has to mean something, and it kind of makes me think a little bit about like my mini crisis talk, and then Daniel and I did the mini crisis like OG Rose talk. But it's almost like it has to mean something if you're having a conversation with somebody, and it's like, but what about just the actual conversation? Like, what is that? Like, why doesn't that have a validity to itself? Not just the outcome of that conversation, but the conversation itself, if that makes any sense. And I want to say one other thing, but that was just my initial response to what you just said.
No, that's really good because I mean, I've been caught in that trap of of wanting something to mean something, or a specific interaction to mean something.
Yeah.
Um, and one good example I can have is actually there's actually a really good example with one of my past girlfriends,
Mm-hmm.
where I remember it seemed unclear to me where I stood, I guess. Um,
What was that last word you said?
I said it seemed unclear to me where we were standing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so I wanted to ask her about,
Yeah.
you know, like if she wanted to be in a relationship or something like that. And funny enough, "Oh," she said, "Oh, we kissed. We're already dating." And I was like, "Oh, this is an example of that for me. I just took it as the kiss was something of I just expressed interest in the person.
Right.
But for her, it was signification of that we were already dating,
Yeah.
which was just wild to me,
Yeah.
right? It was crazy, the signification. But then there's also examples of people that kiss other people and it means nothing. It signifies nothing. Um, I had this. I remember this example specifically because I was talking to a coworker of mine, and she said that she struggles with friend and intimate relationships because for her, kissing a random person at a party is just kissing a random person at a party. It has no it has no real crazy significance, except this guy that she did kiss. He took it as a significant thing because he thought that she expressed interest in him.
Like when it's very warm out.
Sounds
Like when there's no snow on the ground.
Yes, that sounds good. We'll plant them then.
Bunch of big flowers.
Yes, sounds good. Sorry, we just want to check if we can plant flowers when it's sunny. No snow. So it meant something to this guy,
Hmm.
but it didn't mean anything to
And
her.
it didn't mean anything for the other person.
Yeah.
So I think that
Yeah.
that really expresses well, to me, it further solidifies your point about this philosophical questions. Um,
Yeah.
because,
Yeah, definitely.
you know,
Well, yeah. So there's this like quote from Charlie Chaplin. I think it's by Charlie Chaplin. So like maybe I'm not sure, but I think it was him. And he said something about like it was like never bury your body to someone who doesn't understand your soul or something like that, something like that. And I thought that was pretty provocative and beautiful, because it sort of was saying like, you wouldn't really want to just kind of extend that kind of openness unless they really unless they really understood the deeper things, the things that kind of are within that body and vessel that emanate out through that body and vessel. And I guess it just makes me think about how the lines being, I guess what I mean to say is like the lines being blurred on physicality can then make obviously everything else very confusing, because it's like, well, is a kiss just a hello? Like I remember this one guy in college was like, oh, just, a kiss is just a hello. It's nothing, like, don't really think much about it. And it's just interesting because it's like, that is some people's mindset, and that's not necessarily wrong, but it certainly is confusing. It can be confusing in terms of what significance does that hold? And it's weird because, like I said before, it's like, well, not every conversation has to mean a certain outcome. So there can be a risk in saying like, well, a kiss means X or Y. But the thing is that in that talk, I talk about how things will always have meaning. They'll always have meaning. The thing is that to have some sort of superstructure which kind of leads to a certain outcome that you want necessarily, because you can't be sure. Now, it's more about like the fact that there has to be this dialectic between the two people of what those meanings are and what do those things mean, like you talk about a lot, like where it's like you actually make this conversation together with a language almost with that person of what things mean, because you can't assume that a kiss means X, Y, or Z, or that it doesn't mean X, Y, or Z. So it would really be important to understand that for somebody else and respect that. Because like, say with this conversation thing, like, oh, well, people only see talking to maybe the opposite gender as like an interest thing. Well, I think that there can be some risks with that, because people forget the substance of conversation and of just being interested in stuff and maybe hopefully being interesting themselves. But at the same time, if somebody were to take it that way, if they're like, well, I really only talk to the opposite sex because if I'm interested in them, like want to date them, pursue them, then it would be something to respect and say, okay, that's not really for me, but I see that's something you do and you think that way. So I'm going to say, great talking to you this time, and I'm not going to talk anymore if you're not interested in pursuing that. So I guess what I'm going to say is I think that it maybe requires more now today of being more dialectical, because you have to have more of these kind of back and forth conversations of what things mean, and I think maybe one of the things that was maybe more existentially like provided some existential stability was some of the yes, they're considered like traditionalist, and yes, they can be considered like oppressive or something, but at the same time they kept some boundaries, like in terms of the formal concepts from religion of marriage, of sexuality, and of physicality. So it's like I think those structures were there for those reasons. It wasn't solely just to like be oppressive, but yes, they could be used for that. So it's just kind of I think now, if that's going to be like unleashed, then it's more work for each individual to do. And I'm just wondering if we can do that work. Like, is that happening? Like, is that work being done? Because I think it's pretty important. It's probably more important than it ever has been. And yet we seem not to always value the art of the conversation, the art of the dialectic process. So I just wonder, like, well, gee, I hope we're like, it's almost like a new level of responsibility. And if somebody can handle that, like I said before, if somebody can handle doing a long-term partnership and not being married, like it's not really my place to say if that's right or wrong, or if they should or shouldn't, it really would be for the individual to know if they can kind of handle that without having some of those more traditional structures to kind of use as a given, as Daniel will use. Like in Belonging Again, he talks a lot about the givens, right? The givens kind of give us some sort of sense of place markers, if you will, for certain human desires, human ambitions and things. It kind of gives it sort of like a little, I'm just imagining like a little cart, and you get to at least contain everything in that cart. So you don't have to try to like carry 100 things at the same time. You can at least like put in the cart and be like, okay, now we can roll the cart where it needs to go for our vision or for our dream or for what we're trying to accomplish, So otherwise it can end up feeling like you're carrying 17 heavy bags, like with your two hands, and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then you end up just like dropping it all and feeling really like, possibly sad and feeling like, what's wrong with me and why isn't anything ever working, So sorry, that was a lot of scattered ideas, but I just wanted to say too, on like something I mentioned earlier about the character. Again, like I could never evaluate somebody else's like character and what decision they make, but I'm just saying that there is something about this interesting place with marriage of making a really important decision based on like realizing you really don't have actually a lot of information in terms of what exactly the future will hold, and yet that's kind of part of saying like, well, we're going to make it like work come hell or high water. We're going to make it work. Basically, we're going to try our best. Whereas I feel like what the dating tries to do is saying like, well, let's see, like but that's the question mark. Let's see how long, like, let's see if we can make it work, and then we'll decide. And yet it's like you said, like, what time is the right amount of time to see if it works? Like, should you wait 3 years? Should you wait 13? Should you wait like 13 days? Or like, so it's like, okay, that maybe that can work as like a logical sort of formulation, but how do you define the terms? How would you know when the right time is the enough time? Unless you just have a sense, I guess, or like you just like, okay, now we know. So it's not like it's not possible, but I think it's more on one's head. Like it's more that one has to make a decision about it. Anytime there's more choice, it's like Barry Schwartz's book, The Paradox of Choice. There's more existential destabilizing that can happen because you feel more responsible about your choice, right? Like you have to feel. So I don't know. It's interesting because it's more. I think there are more choices, which then. And I think dating presents more choices. And that's not necessarily bad, but it just might take more dialectical work and inner work. And I hope, but at the same time, there's sort of like, because there's not like the decided commitment on it, maybe it also, like I said, you don't exactly know if you should ultimately hang your hat there or not. Now, if people can, I don't know, maybe people can do that. Maybe they can do that. But I wonder if, like you said, it's actually pretty new in the span of human history. So it's hard to say if it's like working or not. I don't know. I don't know if we need to decide if it's working or not. I'm just saying like it's interesting because the project of dating is relatively young, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to say or see if it's like, what is it doing on a grander scale for people and their decision. Like I said, I think the risk is maybe that it's like, it's always about feeling good. Like we're doing good and feeling like you even have the capacity to assess that. And then realizing that like in real life with marriage and the natural, like you said, the natural things that would come from that, sex, children, running a home, land, etc. Now that might seem very antiquated, but at the same time, it's what most of human history does and what biology really follows with. Then it's kind of like you will never really know you'll never really know for sure if you'll be able to handle it. It's almost like you just ultimately have to, but that's good in a way because there's something very adventurous about that in a sense because you kind of keep following along with that ride and with the uncertainty.
It almost seems like we've been doing it backwards.
Yeah. What's that?
I said it almost seems like we've been doing it backwards. Well, at least people have started to do it backwards, meaning like marriage is like the epitome, or we've made marriage to be the epitome of certainty. Basically, like it's supposed to be this thing where, I mean, you see this in movies all the time, right? The aspect of cold feet, of running away, all this stuff. We're just very. It's like it signifies certainty to the highest degree. If you're like willing to marry somebody in this age, you're like, wow, you must really like this person. You must really be sure of yourself, right? And then and what's funny enough is when you talk to other people, when you just talk to like maybe the person's family members or something, or your friends, they'll impose their criteria on you. They'll be like, well, have you lived with them first, right? You should probably live with them first. Like, this is a very common saying. You should probably live with them first before you get married. I think my mom has told me this. um, or you should probably, or here's an interesting criteria. One of my friends says you should see uh, how they treat animals first before you decide to marry them, right? All these criteria before uh, you being absolutely certain of marrying a person. And I think some of these are definitely valid to some extent. But again, it still always shows itself as there's always that element of like, well, we don't really know. I mean, you know, uh, we don't really know. And I think the one aspect of religion that I actually enjoyed is that it made the lines very distinct, right? Once religion kind of got tossed to the wayside, um, things are very blurry now, and things are very confusing. Uh, Now, it's not to say that those things shouldn't have been challenged or deconstructed, but I think the consequence of the deconstruction and those challenges are that we are merely left with nothing to replace them. We are left with a kind of a tangled deconstruction, and we can't, and we're just confused, and people are confused, and that's why dating is probably more difficult than ever, because
Yeah.
we have just a repertoire of signification where at least some type of religion or structure gave that signification, right? Marriage before sex, yada yada, you know, just laid down the lines very clear. Um, but now we're doing everything the other way around, and there is no structure, no, and we're all at our whims with each other. We're all trying to decipher with one another um, what is between all of us. So this, I feel like, is very challenging. The the culture itself. I mean, that's like the one thing I would say that religion gave uh, that was good. Um, but the thing was, like, again, we found nothing to replace that aspect. Um, and I feel like that's the consequence, right? Like, I feel like this is very Nietzschean here that I'm bringing up, where it's like God is dead, but then everyone's like celebrating, like, yay, we've deconstructed everything. But then it's like, okay, we still have a really big problem. We still have
Well,
a
it's funny.
really
It's
big
funny you
problem.
say that. Yeah. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt.
You're good.
Well, it was funny you say that because Joel and Samuel Barnes had a conversation part two. They were talking about art, but they got really into theology a lot in part two. And it was Joel brought up how, like, the Nietzschean expression, and how a lot of times it's thought of as like, you know, yeah, like God is dead, and like, we should have done this, and it's like now we're free. But it's like, it's actually, I think Nietzsche, there was a much more tragic sense to that, where it was like, oh God, what have we done? Like, we've done this, and now we have to be God, or we're going to make something else God, essentially. And I think in the this realm of romance, I do sometimes wonder if now the religion is romance. Like, the religion has become, there's almost a, how do I say this, like a faith in, it's almost like the faith is in these romantic relationships, almost like as if that's where you're going to get your source of, there can be very, very weighty purpose, and which it's not all bad, but at the same time it can be extremely, it's like it can be extremely fulfilling and good and like intoxicating. And it's almost like, if you think about worship in a religious sense, often led people to connection with the divine. And there's a similar, I think there's possibly the replacement. I don't know, I'm just entertaining the thought, because you said, like, what if we replaced it with? And one could say like, well, why do you need to have something to replace it with? But the thing is, God with, basically. But the thing is, we are oriented towards worship. That's what Joel and Samuel Barnes were talking about, basically. And I think it's very true. Like and it's like, it's almost French Revolution. Like, what, you're going to tear things down, but what are you going to build up? Like, what are you going to put there in its place? There have to be, in a sense, like some structure, unless you just want it to be man himself. But that's why I wonder if romance does start to take a deified type of role in our culture, because it's almost like, here's let's just say this metaphysical God structure, and if you take that away, well, what do you have? You have like man himself, right? There's man there's and so it's almost like, okay, now he's got to do it, I guess, somehow, and people be that for each other. And I think that can make dating very, there are a lot of like ethical, like, I don't want to say ethics, and like, I'm not talking about like but there's almost moralization that happens in relationships today with behavior, and like, there can be these like big moralization types of games that happen in dating relationships, and it can be very weighty, I guess I just want to say. It can also be extremely intoxicating and extremely wonderful, but what happens when there's like a crash in that? And I don't think that's being pessimistic. I think that's human, that people either have a falling out, or they break up, or even just they remain in that relationship, but they disappoint one another in very big ways that just kind of completely like shatter their idea of who that person is to them, or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I think you're right. I think you're right with a really helpful role of religion in kind of is allowing for these structures and sense of a placement for these really sacred events. I mean, sex, marriage, these are very sacred types of events, and honestly kind of miraculous. I mean, you take, like, I don't know, I just think there's something very miraculous about this. I mean, if we think about it, like in Catholicism, I mean, there's a sacrament. I mean, I think marriage is a sacrament in certain religions, like in Roman Catholicism, probably in Greek Orthodox, this is an actual sacrament. So it's considered to be. So I think what's odd is, it's really ironic. Okay, stick with me. I hope this makes sense. But there's almost like while there's a deification of it, the sacred has been stripped from it at the same time. It's really strange. Like the sacrament of that would have been acknowledged by like the church and maybe those in that community has been taken away, but now we provide it ourselves, I think. Or I think that's possible, that people try to fill it. They still do that, but now with the metaphysical structure of God being absent from that, now it's like this. It's almost like when you try to connect, like there's something about this sort of like this only lasts so long, right? Because it's like it's a back and forth of these two energies of people. And I'm not saying it can't work. I'm just saying that the risk is there's nothing that kind of, you get this kind of Trinitarian infinity, if you will, like the 3 points of an infinity, where there's like the connecting and the two sides. That's what you almost have when the metaphysical structure of God is there, because it's this sort of linking into the eternal to fuel that relationship and hopefully sustain it, right? But if you don't have that, if you've got two finites, it's really just about how long each other can last, or provide something that is like an endless source, but it's coming from them and they are ultimately finite. Yes, they can be a vessel for the infinite, but then they'd have to have their own relationship with an infinite, whether that be God or some other metaphysical structure. So I guess what I mean to say is, like, it's weird. We've taken the sacrament aspect of it in a religious sense. In many ways, the modern man has taken that away from that relationship, and yet we've kind of deified romance and having a partner or girlfriend or boyfriend, and like elevated that person to almost godlike status, because they make us feel so amazing. It's like they make you feel so good, and it's hard to not just basically use them as like your source of everything, like, just to plug in and just be like, yes, I'm like alive again, which there can be something really great about, like having a relationship that makes you feel alive. But when there's that dependency, like, I think the risk is that that's only sustainable for so long. I don't know, challenge me on that. Like, maybe these are just some thoughts that come to mind. It makes me think a lot of my flashlight work, because this is a lot of what my main thing is, like digging into like what is sustainable love. and there's, I think a lot of times the romance is, there's such a high intensity, which is super alluring, but then it just, electricity is not like the sun. It does go out sometimes, and so anyways, that's just some thoughts on that. I think you're right though with what you say on religion.
Yeah, like, see, I think at least I could say this applies at least to the Western world when we talk about Christianity and everything, because just think about this, right? If we were to follow Christianity all the way through, there's a concept. There's a concept of God that begins to emerge, which
Right.
is that God has like this unconditional love,
Right.
right? And forgiveness and so on. Um, but the moment we started stripping away religion, that concept never left. Except we started applying that concept to individuals.
Oh, I want
Um, and I think that's where it gets dangerous. And I think that's exactly what you were talking about, like two finite beings expecting infinity.
Yeah.
And I think that's some of the dangers of that, where
Can I do that
like,
one?
okay, you have no God, and maybe that's fine,
Can I
but at the
do
same
this
time,
one?
you're still deifying your partner.
Right.
Your
And
partner, and that's too
yeah.
burdensome, and to be honest, that's too burdensome for anybody.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's why there is also so much frustration and so much sadness, so much existential issues, because what we do, and I think this has to do with you and Daniel's talk in the meaning crisis, right? We make our partner our meaning. They become the meaning of our life.
Yeah.
Right? You hear this in people's statements like, I don't know what to do with myself. This person was the love of my life. Right? Like this person was my everything, everything. And and I think that's one of
That's
the
awesome, Hayden.
consequences of erasing God from the picture.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I mean, I know there's plenty of arguments, about, well, when religion was imposed, there was all these sort of gender roles that were abused, and then there's the aspect of fundamentalism and everything as such. But when I'm talking, what I refer to strictly is that something was at least distinguished, and something gave some kind of structure, um, and at least in a very religious couple, they wouldn't do things for each other. They would do things for each other because of another being, right? They had some obligation as such.
Right. Well,
They felt that obligation as such, right?
yeah.
Now there's really no obligation, right? It's just like, if you treat me well, then I'll stay. If you don't, then I leave. And this is, and I feel like that's a danger. So
Yeah.
No.
Can I add the pink here, sweetie? No. Okay. I'm gonna get another purple. So I think you're absolutely right with that. And I guess I'm wondering, like, what do you think, Javier? Like, what if somebody's like, okay, well, I don't quite buy into, like, I don't quite buy into God or some metaphysical being, but like I'm definitely not making my significant other, whether it's a girlfriend, boyfriend, partner, or even a wife or husband, like I'm not making them my deity. Like, what sure, like one couldn't know if they are or are not. I think though in mainstream dating, I think it's safe to say that happens a lot. But I wonder, I think that I wonder if there is I think that maybe for people who have, because I do believe like people who do work that is usually art, usually like some music, I'm not saying exclusively. Like you could be, I don't know, you could be like Tesla. You could be like this visionary scientist or something. Or maybe people who have a sense of a vision maybe have a better chance, because maybe though they don't ascribe explicitly to like some distinct religion, they still have a sense of like a greater power of God, like this bigger vision. So
Mama, can we do some painting?
maybe for those who have that, it might, I don't know, maybe that could be something to help sustain that that relationship. I don't know though that people generally are thinking about that when it comes to dating though. If we're thinking about like teenagers and 20 somethings, like a lot of times it's just like, I like you, you make me feel good, you're sexy, you know. So it's not like, oh, like we have this vision of work that we're kind of hand in hand. Like that's the thing. Another thing that religion and the conventional family structure did was you were building something together, you know. You're probably having, well, you if we're thinking, pre 1950s, like you're going to be having children, you're going to be having like a home that you take care of and steward, basically. So there was something that was beyond your time span, like beyond even your lifespan, because your legacy is your children. They will go on to continue on that family, basically. So there was always something that connected you, even time space wise, to something bigger than oneself. And I just wonder, like, if in losing that, what, you know, it's almost like for the freedom that dating provides, what has been lost at the what's been the expense of that? Because there's always a cost for everything, you know. It's always like trade-offs, you know. So it's almost like, I don't know. I just wonder if that's. Well, it does make me think. There's a really good book by this woman named Barry Eberstadt, and she writes about how, like, the irony of the women's liberation movement. I just think that, like, it's not that there's nothing. Again, there's trade-offs. There can be some good things about it, but there's probably also going to be some bad things about it. And you're kind of like, now you just have to really be honest with yourself about which trade-off do you want to make. You know, like, do you want to make trade-offs which would be in a traditional structure, or the trade-offs that are outside of that traditional structure? And I think that the thing though that is interesting to me is that with more of this loose sense of commitment. I mean, it's not that people who are dating aren't committed to each other, but it's not certain if they're committed for life. I think that's fair to say. I mean, unless those people decided, like, I date for marriage, so if I date you, we're getting married or something. I don't know, but it's not certain on the whole. And that's the weird thing, right? Javier, it's like, isn't that, you were saying, like, you called it, like, the epitome of certainty or something. Like, it's funny because it's like we want to be more certain about the person in a less certain about where we're going or what we're doing long term. So there's this weird sort of, let me think about this for a second. There's a desire to have more certainty about, I'll get the paper, more certainty about who the person is and if you'll make it or something, which is interesting because then it's like making it is determined by what? You're happy? Things are good? I don't know. It would be interesting to think about that. Like, what does it mean for people to be maybe like flourishing? But this is interesting because all of the, like, flourishing language is really connected to, like, more life, right? Like, more, kind of the abundance, and usually in the past that would have meant, like, you know, being married, and then kind of, because you're married to somebody, you're in a particular location and you're taking care of that place, you're taking care of those children, you're taking care, you know, so it's like you would almost be contributing to whatever that was that you were. But now the only flourishing is maybe thought of in terms of mental health. I'm not sure. Maybe it still could be tied to contributing to your community with the existence of that relationship when it comes to dating. But it does seem to be more focused on, it seems to be a bit more focused on the self, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's less situated, I want to say. Do you think that's fair?
Ooh. Yeah, there's a lot of I mean, what is it like? I want to go back to what you first said
Okay.
about can someone do this without the structure of God in some type of way? I think was it
I'm
the
like
poets?
bring up 15 big giant things. Sorry.
I think like the poets are a good example of this, where they find, or artists in general are good examples of what you're talking about, where they find some expression of the infinite rather than making their own partner the infinite.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
Um, I think I think that is one solution out of the traditional religious structure, where you find some expression of the infinite, but not through your partner. You don't make your partner the means of expressing your infinite whatever.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I think this is like actually what Carl Jung was expressing when he talked about therapy. Um, uh, you have to embrace some type of infinite in some way. Um, so I
Right.
think that's possible,
Okay.
absolutely. Now going back to your um, losing my train of thought here. What was the final question you asked? To see if
I was asking. So yeah, I think that addresses that. Like, could there be this potential alternative? I think it right, and I like maybe if that somebody has some connection to the infinite through their work or what they're kind of creating their that. Um, bless you. So yes, and I mean, one could argue like, okay, they're still kind of connected to some larger metaphysical something that either is God or the infinite project, if you will. So yeah, but I think that's true. I think that maybe has that's an alternative to consider, or at least to bring up for sure. And then the other thing was we were talking about like the situatedness of relationships. Like I was saying how a marriage. Oh, right, because I was talking about like what's the maybe I want to say the goal of like mainstream dating culture seems to be that the goal is for both people to be happy. And while there's something really good about like mental, having like not, wanting to like not be anxious and depressed all the time, like I think having good mental health is important. But it's like when the goal is to just be to both be happy, it's much more focused on the self and yourselves versus I think it used to be in the past, and one of the roles that possibly religion played in having the structure of marriage, family, was that you would be situated, and that even just that relationship itself and its maintenance would actually maintain an area. It would maintain like even just some piece of land or some part aspect of the community would be kind of, I don't know, maybe like sustained by that. I don't know. That could be a stretch because maybe it can be done through solely through individuals, but obviously individuals always come from some family. Um, and but I think I would say I think it's pretty fair to say that dating. I think what I asked you was like, do you think dating does seem to be less situated and more focused on the self and less on even a given place and kind of what that the ripples effect of in the community of that particular relationship?
yeah, I think I mean, you hear this all the time, right? I think the focus of being happy, right? You could say becomes God in this sense. If we want to just speak about religion, because you hear this all the time when people are about to get divorced or something. They're like, "Well, we just weren't happy," you know, plain and simple, right? We just weren't happy.
Yep.
Um, and I hear this all the time, right? This is the standard. This is the criteria for how we determine such things, right? That we just simply weren't happy.
Right.
And I'm always very concerned about when people say those statements because, I mean, it's just so ambiguous, and it does focus. it does focus it on the self, like you had said. It does focus it on the self, right? Like this person just doesn't make me happy. And I think when we have the centeredness on our partner like this, I think that's what makes it dangerous. Um, and I know there's both sides to this, obviously, where having a sort of, you know, putting aside abuse and all that stuff,
Yes. I was gonna say. I was like, we should make a disclaimer about
putting
that.
aside abuse and all that stuff,
Right.
uh, I want to say for the most part, people do tend to glorify this self centeredness of, well, I'm just not happy.
Yeah.
But again, you know, this is and this is why I bring up religion again, because religion didn't teach you about being happy. It didn't teach you about being happy. It just told you, it taught you about obligations, and you want to bring up the Christian sense, right? Obligations and forgiveness, um, and work. So, funny enough, I think I actually, when I talk to people about God, actually, and just like my conversations, I think it's really interesting because most people uh, would like to actually entertain the concept of God. They just don't like the traditional structure, or very common phrase. They don't like organized religion.
Right.
Right? But I
Yeah.
feel like this is ironic when someone expresses they don't like organized religion, because I feel like implicitly this represents unorganized uh, experiences in our love lives. To some degree, I feel like this does play a role in the unorganized uh, criteria of dating in general, where I think there is obviously value in the critique against organized religion, but again, we fall back into the same thing. Once you deconstruct something and do not give something to replace it, I cannot say that we are existentially better off. I think that's a better way to frame it. I can't say
That's a
that we
good
are
way to put it.
existentially better off. Maybe morally people can argue that we are better off, and so on, but I cannot necessarily agree that we are existentially better off, which I feel like, you know, is a part of the meaning crisis.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that it would be interesting to just kind of think more about that idea of like, what are people replacing God with these days? I don't know. Like, what, and does it tend to be the self itself, or maybe career, or relationships, or expectations about all of those things? I don't know. But I think you're right. I think there is more existential difficulty today. And I think, to be fair, for those who feel very hesitant about marriage or feel reluctancy there, it's also a lot of times people are coming from their own, they possibly have had very hard experiences witnessing their own parents, or seeing like so many people in their family be divorced or things like that. So it's understandable why people are like, I don't know, I don't know about this, but that also gets into a whole lot of stuff regarding like, but the point is that I can understand why there can be the concern and the hesitancy. At the same time, like, I think what you're kind of wanting to look at and what's so important is like, is dating doing us better? Like, is it offering something that is better or not? And I think what I think is fair to say is, like you put it, which I think is great, is that it leaves us more existentially, I don't say out to dry. That's way too harsh, but I think maybe it's just it's rough. It's a little bit rougher existentially. and it's I mean, now it's like, it's weird, Javier, because like the boundaries and the spaces of like when people communicate, don't communicate, it's getting even, I feel like it gets even harder with like social media and cell phones and all of that. Whew. I mean, it's even harder because there's even less boundaries. You know, there's even less natural boundaries that would occur that, you know, in before these technologies. So, oh my goodness, that's beautiful. Sorry, just my daughter painted something very beautiful. That's beautiful, sweetie.
Yeah, I think
Put it on the fridge. Okay.
I think that definitely does play a role because, um, you know, I mean, this has just always been my observation. As much as we get away or attempt to get away from religion, there's still aspects of people participating in those kind of like habits, I guess, habits, right?
Yeah.
Like just the idea of worship, the idea of things that are sacred. Now, what becomes sacred is my happiness,
Yeah. I mean, I
right?
think that's
My happiness is my sacredness, right? So if you uh, encroach on that, then it's done. Um,
yeah. No,
uh,
I think that's very fair to say.
yeah, we're very obsessed with happiness rather than, and I think this is why going back to like the old philosophers, you know, like Plato and all them and Aristotle, like rather than happiness, it's like, well, answering the question of like, what does it mean to live a good life? I feel like that needs
Yeah.
to go back into the question of what does it mean to live a good life,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you can definitely live a good life without always being happy.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Um,
absolutely. And like, I think obviously, like you said, there's obvious examples, abuse, verbal, physical, um, affairs, things like that, that can get into why people would go in that direction. I think it gets trickier though when the standard is it's good and I'm happy. That's when it gets very, very murky, and it kind of dilutes things a lot in terms of now understanding, like, was this a case where like you try, and I know everybody's trying their best. I mean, I'm not, I think, but it's just sometimes I think if you give yourself permission for something that maybe you it's almost like, oh my gosh, I'm like, the only example I can think of is labor. I like told myself, I'm like, I'm not using anything, I'm not going to, I said, I was like, I'm deciding now that I'm not going to use any medicine, anything, because I just decided that's what I want to do. And it's like, if you know it's off the table, you're like, okay, because it's off the table, I'm gonna have to do this. I'm gonna have to, you know, give birth naturally, basically. And I think like it's so much in the head. There's so much in the head. It's such a head game sometimes. And you know, I think sometimes we maybe haven't, I wonder if we've gotten out of the marathon mindset, like maybe we're sprinting or something, which, don't get me wrong, there's a skill set for that too. But we've lost the art of the marathon or something. Like we don't necessarily always develop the headspace for what so much of life is like, is a head game. Like it's I want to say it's a mind game, but there's a lot that's psychological, and you know, the fortitude and the sense of not giving up and getting creative with solutions, because I don't think people should just be like miserable in their partnership or marriage. I mean, I hope not, but then that gets into like, you know, can you get creative? Are there things that could be done? And obviously counseling is often suggested as something, and I mean that can be a good thing. I think like philosophy can be great. Like, you know, are you like reading together? Or are you know, is there, you know, are you learning a new language together? Or are you trying different? There's so many possibilities. I feel like we pigeonhole ourselves so much. Like, well, I tried, and maybe you did. I'm not saying. I mean, who knows? People could be trying their hearts out. I'm sure, but it's like sometimes I think. Sometimes just the simplest things, like the things you've talked about in your videos, which I think are so important, about just like, are you paying attention? Are you seeing like that they like a certain thing and saying, I will be willing to extend myself into that activity or whatever it is, just to say, I can only know about them. The way I can know about this person more is to let myself, I don't know, try my hand at tennis or do traveling or go to their favorite museum or read their favorite book. Maybe there's something I could learn. And I think sometimes we're so, I wonder if we're so bent on an outcome that it's ironic. It's like you're so bent on an outcome that you end up like undercutting the actual mechanisms of getting to that outcome. And yet when you're more focused on the you know, I want to say like the person themselves or curiosity, I don't know, then it almost opens oneself up more to that outcome happening in the end, like of resolving that relationship or something like that. So yes, conform. Yeah, yummy oranges. So yeah, they're pink. That's awesome. Pink oranges.
I know I've said this before at one point, but I think it's like or we for like when I said that the epitome of marriage now is like
Yeah, that's the word.
certainty, right?
Yeah.
But for some reason I think people just lose the aspect of experimenting or marriage being experimental at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
I think people lose that because, like I said, I really feel like dating stole the spirit of marriage because dating is now the epitome of, well, this is your chance to experiment, right? This is your chance to see new people. This is your chance to
Hmm.
get to know yourself. This is your chance to discover who you are. Um, Dating is hailed as the experimental queen of getting to know yourself, getting to know other people, and so on. And then marriage falls to the wayside as something that you've already solidified, right? Which
That's
I
such
feel
a
like is
good
a
point.
completely wrong way to look at it. I feel like actually marriage, there's an aspect of marriage that only you can discover about yourself in marriage.
Yes.
Um,
I feel like that's such a good point. And I know you and Cadell talked about this a bit in your live.
yeah. Mhm.
So that's a great one. I hope everybody goes and watches that. But that's the irony, right? Like it's like dating's like, yeah, cool, like experimenting, all of this stuff. But really like and then we like think of marriage as not experimental at all. But it's weird. It's almost like the experimentalness of marriage seems to actually be more how do I put this? I know, now I'm trying to think about like the experimentation within dating and the experimentation within marriage and what are the kind of differences there. What I think about is like it makes me think of like child like it just hang with me. It's almost I don't and please don't take this as an offense. I mean, obviously there can be great things to dating, but it's almost like there can be something childish in dating and there's something childlike in marriage experimenting. I don't know if that holds water. But I guess what I mean to say is like because I think we've always thought of it. I think it's how we think about experimentation, Javier. I wonder if it's because we think of experimentation as something you can just do and there are no consequences. Like, it's like I'll just, put this little test tube in that test tube and like, and not like realizing that like, maybe you have that explosion and that's like a good thing. Let's just say even in this metaphor, it's a good thing. But then like, but now you've got shattered glass everywhere and you're not responsible for cleaning it up in a dating scenario necessarily. Or it is glass and you're like, dang, this hurts and this is like, I'm getting cut now and I'm bleeding. Whereas like I think in marriage, I wonder if because experimenting is more tied to, that this is a responsibility of yours. I wonder if there's more that you kind of you have to kind of do yourself. And yeah, there could be some more to think about there. I feel like I want to flesh that out a bit more in terms of an analogy, but I think you're right though. On the whole, this just the general point is so good that dating is thought of as experimental, marriage is thought of as not, and yet really we should think about it the opposite direction in a way.
I mean, because
or at least not lose sight of the experimental in marriage, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I like. Funny enough, I know consciously people want to be.
Sorry, hold on a second. Let me mute my mic.
Okay. I think consciously people want to be experimental in dating, but I think unconsciously, uh, they're not really being experimental. And the reason why I say that is because of the way. If we just give the example of like uh, settling, right? The aspect of settling is heavily looked down upon um, to such an extent. Settling is looked down upon. Uh, to settle is like to demean yourself, to belittle yourself in any aspect. Um, and again, the criteria is your happiness, uh, and your standards, uh, for that happiness. So I just, I mean, there's so much there of, and I've always felt ambivalent about the idea of just settling being only a negative connotation. Uh, so there's that. Um,
Can you say that one more time about the negative connotation?
I always feel like settling, the aspect of settling in our culture today is typically received negatively. Um, it's always perceived as demeaning, like, oh, you're settling, you're giving up, you are no longer choosing to experiment, basically, because you're settling. You're basically saying, because the idea is that there's always somebody else out there, uh, there that the other person perceives as better, and so you're settling to some degree, right? But the ironic part is everybody settles to some degree. We all settle to some degree. So it's like I never understood this aspect of settling. We all settle to some degree, but I think people like to feel like they never settled on anything. They got their standard. They got their uh, and that stuff like that. They achieved their standard. Um, but I feel like there's always a settling. So I don't know.
That, yeah, that's, man, that's such a great point. It makes me think about like when we've talked about like unconditional love and conditional love. It's like, I hate to break it to you, but all love is actually conditioned to some degree. There is some condition being met for this love to be even experienced. But it's funny, Javier, because as you're talking about that and using that term settling,
Mhm.
it's like, man, let me think about this. It's almost like we want to be in constant flux. This image of sediment came to my mind. Like, when you talk about like sediment settling, like, you say you have some like dirt in water in a cup or something, and in a jar, and like you shake it up, and it's all like swirling around, and then it like settles to the bottom. It's almost like we are, I don't know, we're almost weary of like of so I guess it's just interesting because the word, it's like, oh, I'm settling, and then it's almost like people don't want to settle, but they may want to settle down at some point. It's interesting how that language kind of shifts to, or maybe people are even hesitant about settling down. But I guess what I want to say is that it's interesting because in a sense, if you want to have a long-term relationship with somebody, you're definitely going to have to settle. Like, you're going to have to set down upon some decision, right? So I understand the connotations of like, don't pick somebody who make sure you don't pick someone when you could do better or something. Like, I mean, I guess there's like, this is the thing though, there are some, okay, you know how we talked about like Plato and the Stoics, and I mean, not that Plato, but you know what I mean, like pre-Socratic and Socratic and Stoic types of thinkers. Like there was this idea of what's the good life, right? And it's interesting, it almost feels like the things that you should be very settled about is, what are those things for you? Like, what is the good life for you? And on those terms, you should be certain that the other person is on board with that, in a sense, like you both hold that shared vision of the good life. And then honestly, like that's the most important thing to be certain about, not like how they like to fold their socks, or when do they like to eat lunch, or like it's funny though, because we don't, all of this stuff that I would say arguably is, I'm not saying it's not important, because I'm very much a person who's about like the embodied experience and not ignoring our like physical realities and things like that, but all of those are so are so preferential, and yet they don't, at the end of the day, they won't, when you like to, how you like to fold your socks or share chores or something. It's weird. It's almost like you think that you'll be certain and that will carry you through a long-term relationship, but because people change and because you have so many new circumstances that you don't anticipate, it's more important to get the fundamentals right. Like you want to be certain about the fundamentals, and then whatever's erected upon that, well, who knows what that's going to be, but you at least it's not going to like fall down, because you have like basically, if you think about a foundation of a house, that's there, right? So, hey buddy. So
I think that's interesting.
So I guess what I said, how we talked about like, what's this word you keep using? It starts with an E.
Epitome.
Yeah, thank you. I'm like, what is that word again? But basically, like, dating wants to be very certain, right? Like, I'm certain about this person. Hey, sorry. I hear you, buddy. I hear you. Wants to be very certain about a person, but what they're basing their certainty on is stuff that ultimately could become uncertain. Okay, thanks. Thank you, Hanson.
Hey, Javier. How you doing, buddy?
Hey.
Talking about that. Hey, how you doing? Well, don't scream at Javier.
You got some chicken, Haven? That's so yummy. That's so funny. So I guess that was the simple point. Dating wants to be this epitome of certainty. Okay. But what it ends up being very uncertain about is the fundamentals. And then the opposite is true, I think, for marriage. A lot of times, I think marriage would require being very certain about the fundamentals, but it's actually much more open to the uncertainty of particularities.
So I'm gonna get very Hegelian here for a moment, which I'm
please do.
Which I'm pretty sure Cadell and Daniel would appreciate. It's almost like we've made marriage absolute knowing, to some degree. Except we don't really know how the absolute knowing functions unless you read Hegel. So we want to be absolutely sure and certain and know that this person is for me. Except when you actually study or understand absolute knowing, we understand that this is a dialectical process and not a epitome of certainty. Hopefully I did that service. Hopefully I did that right. Just service there. I'm not sure if I did. We'll see. We'll see. But yeah, the certainty part is like I like what you brought up about the socks, right?
Thanks.
Because I've heard so many people tell me like, well, the little things matter, right? The way they fold their socks, the way they eat, if they're messy, those little things always matter. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, do they matter? For me, I'm always confused by that statement, like they matter. And the reason why I say that is because if they do matter, are you saying they matter because you're intent on changing them? Or are you intent on realizing or are you acknowledging that you can't change them and you don't like the idea that you can't change them? So the very fact that they fold their socks a certain way or they eat a certain way, you realize that you can't change them. So this is unacceptable.
Well, I guess it seems like people might advise that because they're like, well, people advise that because they're like, well, it would just be easier if you guys, are on the same page about that. Right? Like, it feels like people are saying, the little things matter because one day in, day out, when you're living with the person, that could bother you or that could be hard because you do it differently. So I think I think that's why. Sorry, just a second. I think that's why people advise that. But I think that ultimately, like, here's the deal. If like if the whole relationship hinges upon the way you fold socks, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I get it. I guess there can be things that are that bothersome or something. I mean, look, I think there are certain things, like, it makes me think a little bit about like Jordan Peterson when he talks about like, here's some things to maybe be mindful of when thinking about a partner. And I think that, sure, like, there can be things that would be easier if you both did things a similar way or whatever. And if that's like hyper important to the person, then it's their life and they might choose that to be something as a criteria or something like that. But the thing is that I would hope that two people who can work out their difference over folding socks, if they can't work out their difference over folding socks, how are they going to work out their difference on, oh, I don't know, their paradigm of God, or how to raise children, or, you know, what to do when their crops don't come out, or so, you know, when there's hardships or things like that. I feel like it's not. I wonder if that makes it just, we're getting really little weights here, and really, like, there's like a 300-pound dump, like, you know, barbell that's, or whatever. There's going to be like a lot bigger weights to lift, and then you're kind of like, oh wow, I'm not equipped for this. But then you are like, no, it's just the person, they're just wrong for me, you know, which maybe they are. Again, that can happen. And, you know, of course, in the case of people, you know, of abuse or just like utter horrible, you know, situations that some people can go through, you know, that there can be an understanding for that to occur, for people to have to, you know, end a relationship or whatever. But it's just that I think that it's almost like, to make that I don't know. I think to always have the out option makes it very easy to appeal to it. Mm-hmm. And like, you know, Daniel Zaruba, he has this cool term in German that it means like heart thing. He said it's like a heartfelt. It's like an item. It's a physical item that you tend to, even when it breaks, you fix it, you mend it, and you still wear it for decades and decades, and maybe you pass it on to your children or your grandchildren, your grandchildren. And it's like, I wonder if we've forgotten the heart thing of relationship, like, where we don't mend. We just, because if you think about it, the way we engage with a lot of other things that we use or employ or coexist with, if something breaks, a lot of times you just go get a new one. Which, you know, most people do that. It's not, I'm not like trying to judge that. What I mean to say is, like, we've forgotten the mending skill. Like, I feel like we haven't.
Well, we've made it into a commodity. It's actually it's very pertinent to Daniel's article on effacement, because what we've done is and this is the fall. This is the fall without religion here, is that we were accustomed to embracing a unity as such, but now everything else becomes our standards to some degree becomes the unity, or the person becomes the unity, or in some type of fashion. But this unity is always a pseudo unity, because it can always be replaced. And we got accustomed. We've objectified. Well, we're not objectified, but we've objectified the replacement, right? All the apps, all the dating apps, all the people that you can meet. People now become just as replaceable as a sink head, you know, like it's become just so replaceable, and it's easy to give up now. But I think that's a counter reaction, or a very exaggerated counter reaction to the Christian version of the way Christianity had originally viewed marriage, where it was like, getting divorced was highly discouraged. highly discouraged. Like you should keep fighting for it. You should try to work it out to the highest degree, and this is also very pertinent to Muslim religion as well, where like divorce is very discouraged. Um, so I think that is the counter reaction. But now it's like if we're giving up too easily, um, where are we going, right? I think this is why dating is so hard now, because it's just so easy to, well, oh, obviously I don't like the way he folds his socks, so I can just find somebody that can, right? All these apps and everything else, this reach that we are now given through technology really prevents us from doing you could say, like, the little philosophical works of I think what you made up the point on the socks, I think was really important, because this is the first thing I started thinking about. It's like if you can't work out the sock problem, right? This is like your first little philosophical engagement. What do we do with the fact that I don't like the way you fold your socks, or something like that. Because this little exercise, and I think these little problems should be looked at as little exercises, as little mental exercises, because when we come to the real issues, like the big ones, um, if we can't handle the little exercises, then yeah, we're probably not going to survive the big exercise, whatever that turns out to be. Um, and I'm trying to stray away from the concept of like the parts and the whole. I don't want to necessarily imply that, like, oh, if this little part isn't working, then the whole is just going to fall apart. I don't want to imply that when I'm saying this. But what I'm trying to say is that um, there are opportunities within every relationship to engage. And if we maybe fail to engage in some areas, then it's maybe not as likely to succeed in the other areas. I don't know. I don't want people to necessarily correlate parts in the whole when I say this.
That's funny. That's funny you say that, because I like Daniel and I were having an Ochiro's conversation, and I basically like said something like that about like the part. It's almost like I said some phrase about like that would imply kind of like the part in the whole, and if one part's like weak, then possibly the whole would be weak. And I was just like, I don't necessarily ascribe to that necessarily. So I get what I get what you're saying though. But I think so. Yes, I get what you're saying. And yeah, when I said that, I was like, let me clarify. Fortunately, I could clarify and just extend it and say what I was saying. So, but the thing is that with little things and the big things, it's it kind of reminds me a little bit of like well, honestly, it does kind of remind me of the Christian notion, where it's almost like if you can be entrusted with little, you can be entrusted with a lot, in a sense. And I think there is something kind of important about this here, though, Javier, because I think, like you said, there is almost like these little, philosophical like testings, as you will, or like opportunities, right? Opportunities to bridge the inevitable gap that is between two people. Because the other thing too, so okay, let me just say this. I think that the little, if you can know how to, well, it's funny, if you just kind of face head on the kind of the big stuff together, like, okay, what do you think of God? And like, what do you think of like, what's your understanding of like an abundant life or things like this? Then it's interesting, because interestingly enough, then often like you can, because you have the big things in place, it makes the little things are just like small potatoes, as they say. Like, it's just like, oh, it really is just socks. Like, cool, you like to fold them like that, and I like to fold them like this. Like, no biggie. But when it's just about the little things, then you lose both almost. Like, just like there's a big blow, like a big fallout over socks, and also there'd be some big existential, ethical type of like fallout over God, or over some bigger topics. So
You won't be able to
I think that like it doesn't help. Like I said at the beginning of our conversation, it doesn't help that people that on the whole, and I mean, we can all view this, and I'm not judging it. There's a place for small talk. There's a place for talking about the quotidian, but in kind of always avoiding topics like politics, religion, and God, which are like some of the most important topics. Because I think all we can think about talking about, all we consider, all we think about when we think about talking about those subjects is argument and bad debate, like yelling at like people yelling at each other, getting upset. Well, then we end up like not talking about some of the very most fundamental things to and axioms that people hold that orient the rest of their lives. So, love you, babe. Hope it goes well. So it's hard because I think, and Daniel has a paper. He has a paper called, I think it's called like trivial or something. Trivial conversations, I forget. But it's like we have gamified a lot of stuff these days, and it's today like now what ends up often being what people talk about in dating relationships. Like I think it's fun and fine and great to have some of the trivial because life's hard. Sometimes you just need some of the lighthearted stuff. It's fun, but at the same time, if there's not the substance there, then I don't know. It's almost like I'm just not exactly sure how that is like is the trivial stuff and like the fact that you both fold your socks the same going to help you when I don't know, you suddenly hit like some depressive spell or like you realize like, oh my gosh, we're fundamental, like we're two people are different, and I think one doesn't quite realize quite what that means until you're married and you're like, oh my gosh, no, like we're very different people, like, and now we have to like what one person finds rejuvenating and life-giving, the other person is like drained by. Well, what do you do in those situations? Like how do you work that out? And if really the basis was just things are easy because we both like to eat brunch and we both like fold our socks the same, so then like how are you going to bridge the other stuff? And one would say like, well, you won't have to bridge anything because you'll know better if you like if you match per se. But I don't know, oddly enough, I feel like there's just you never have a sense of what the future holds. So it's in a way it's a little, I don't want to say naive, maybe that's too harsh of a word, but it's sort of maybe idealistic. Like maybe it's idealistic to think that you could ever know enough about that person and who they're like and what they're like to know what exactly that would. Well, especially if it's based off of some of the more trivial things. Like if it's based off of the fundamentals, like we said, then sure, great. You don't need to know exactly what's going to come. You won't know anyways. And as long as you have, the fundamentals are there, then you're like, well, I know them and I can trust them. And I know that it might get really hard. It might really suck, but it's also going to we'll figure out a way to get through that and we will be stronger for it. It's like building muscle. Like it really hurts to do pull-ups and stuff, but then you're like stronger, right? And you create a stronger bond through that. And yeah, it's tricky when the whole mainstream dating concepts are not the orientation does not, I don't know if it holds much space for like struggle. The only struggle that often result is like heartache and hardship and feelings of like unfulfilled desire and things like that.
The way you brought up, the first thing that came to mind when I didn't think about this when we were talking about the small things and the big things. I think a lot of the issues is that it's a small thing for the other, but it's a big thing to me, or it's a small thing to you, but it's a big thing for me, and et cetera, vice versa. I think these are the big challenges that that couples face. It seems like all the time, where it's like, it doesn't matter to her, but it matters to me. this doesn't matter to him, but it matters to me, and so on and so on. I feel like this little that it's funny because like the little things become the big things is a big thing for somebody else, but the big things are the little things for somebody else, and so on and so on. And I feel like this is always um, hard to tackle for people because, like they said, like you said, they want some sort of sameness. And I think the problem with the unity aspect is like they want a unity, but it's a unity of like sameness. I mean, just think about the aspect of getting matched with somebody online. There's always some implicit uh, common sameness going on. Like, oh, you guys both like watching these shows, or you guys both have these same values. So it kind of already feeds the mind to embrace sameness. And we don't really know how to live in difference, which is perhaps the more difficult task.
Yeah.
We get to know each other off of our commonalities,
Right.
but then when it comes to live in difference and be with each other through difference, this is the more tasking and painful process.
Right. I'm sorry, bud. I'm just trying to cut some orange here for you. Do you want some orange? You want some orange? Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
He's like, yes, I do.
You'll see in the video with your daughter when you had left to talk to the neighbors, your daughter gets up and looks at the camera and just goes.
She goes like this?
Yeah, she does that. It's so funny. It's so funny.
That is so funny, Javier.
She just looks at the camera and she's like, hey.
That is so funny. She's adorable with her thumbs up. Like,
I was laughing so hard. I was like, Michelle's out here, in a panic, talking to the neighbors because she didn't expect them to come. And then her daughter's just in the background, just like, yee.
That is so funny. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. That's amazing. Yeah, I guess I just want to say, like, with this whole different same thing, it's really weird because like it's always going to be a blend of sameness and difference, right? That like you don't have to speak the same language, but having the same language is helpful, right? Like there are certain things that are helpful to have the same. And yet, it's funny, like we often think about diversity in terms of ethnicity, which there's a place for that. We don't always think about the diversity of mind. We don't always think about the diversity of how one operates in their day or whatever. Or the diversity of like people who may tend to be introverted or extroverted, though I'm skeptical of like those, making this such a strong dichotomy or something like that. But it's just interesting because we don't always talk about nuanced difference. And so I think then when nuanced difference is exactly what you're going to experience and encounter in relationship. And I think there's a certain level of having to just say, I accept that we have these differences and that's okay. Like to give people, it's like when Rilke talks about like protecting the other person's solitude. Like there's something about being able to say, you aren't me and you won't be me and you shouldn't be me. You should be you. And to give that person the freedom to be that and not have to kind of contort themselves into some sort of thing that you want them to be for you. It's so important.
Someone,
yeah.
Except like in a play where you have to act out something that's not yourself. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying plays are bad. I'm just saying that making you do something that's not really yourself.
Right. Sometimes we unintentionally put each other into plays and into roles that they shouldn't have because of our expectations. and then they're just always performing. It's like they feel like they always have to perform, and like it's a very eggshell dynamic, like walking on eggshells, you know.
But that's the funny part, isn't it? Like the critique of religion and gender roles were exactly that, right? That we had put people in these roles, and then we critiqued them and saying that they shouldn't be in in any roles, right? We can play any role. But the funny part is that we still unconsciously place roles on each other. We still do it. Um, and the strange part is that the reason why this is more dangerous is because it becomes more unconscious and more hidden.
Like yourself can't be something else than what you do. Like your body. Like your kind of place sometimes make you the opposite of what you do. Like like this pretend this is your one and this is the line thing. So it's like they're different, but you have to like, what if you got stuff you wanted from doing it? Would it be and that doesn't mean you have to. Well, you could. It's like an option of not being yourself, but it's like yourself really can't be changed. Roles or plays or lines, you can't actually change what you do. You can't change what you do. But you can't change everything except what you do.
If you have a script. Like
if you have a script, you can't still change. If you have a script, you can do that. You have to do that script, but that doesn't change what you usually do. Alexa, stop.
Thank you, Haven. I appreciate that, sweetie.
Where did somebody film oranges?
I don't know. I can add another one. So let me try this for a second, buddy. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. Like, we end up doing it anyways. But what did you say is riskier about doing it outside of the religious?
I said it's riskier because trying to remember now. I said it's riskier because we are already. So the critique of religion was that it had placed upon these roles and so on. Oh, well, I'll finish it for her. Okay, seems like we lost Michelle. So I hopefully she comes back. Maybe I'll give her a minute or two. She's probably freaking out. She's probably like, "Oh no, I didn't mean to press this button." She probably fat fingered the exit button, which is what I'm predicting right now. I'm calling it. I'm calling it right now. So we'll see. But okay, I'll just repeat it for her because I know she'll want to see it. What I was saying about religion made it externally obvious, or I don't think that's right. No, I don't like that framing. Externally clear of the roles that people should have within the structure of marriage. But the funny thing is about that ever since we've pushed away religion and we've critiqued and deconstructed the roles that religion had placed upon, we're still placing people within roles. And the reason why I say it's dangerous is because it isn't clear. The roles aren't clear. And when the roles aren't clear, you get ambiguous existential problems, uh, very ambiguous existential statements like we weren't we weren't happy, we just weren't happy. This again, uh, you've if I were to dissect this statement, obviously the partner played a role in something, but what role did you place that partner in? What were the obligations? None of this, none of that was properly defined or properly distinguished, um, and we're kind of just dancing on, a thread of things that we don't know. All we know is that we don't want to do uh, those things. So, but I think an hour and 50 minutes is probably long enough. I will exit for Michelle. Um, it was. I think it was. I think we had talked about a lot and enough. I think this is such a topic that we could talk for hours on. Dating in its course of history. Wait.
It's your hair.
Whoa. Hey, sorry. Are you still there?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I didn't plug in the phone. So
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. It usually gives me a warning, and it didn't, or at
And
least
it
I saw the
didn't.
battery and I was like, oh, it's fine, and it wasn't. So I'm sorry. Do you remember what the risk was that you were saying?
Yeah. So it's funny because I wasn't sure if you were coming back, so I was already explaining again to the
Oh,
audience.
sorry.
But it's okay. I'll explain to you. So just to really kind of make it short or make it as summarized as possible, what I'm trying to say is that the critique of religion, some of the critiques, some of the feminist critique, and a lot of other critiques in general about religion was that religion had placed upon some type of roles for both of the couples within marriage, right? Now, the reason why I say it's dangerous after the critique of religion is because we are still placing people in roles, except we don't really know what those roles are, which lead to existential, ambiguous problems. Or, like the example that I said before, when someone says, "Well, why did you guys get divorced?" Well, we just weren't happy, right? This implicitly already implies that you place your partner in a specific role. Now, what was that role specifically? What were the responsibilities of that role? What came with that role is not really clear. All that is defined was, or explicitly said, was that we just weren't happy. Because I don't think you being the reason of my happiness um, is I think that's kind of like a way to escape, because obviously there's implied responsibilities and implied something in there. Something is implied when someone says those things. So the roles still exist, um, despite our critique of gender roles, anything of that sort. There's a role. We place people in roles, no matter what.
Yeah, I think that's so important what you're saying, Javier, and super duper duper important. Thank you for tracing it out again. And it makes me think that now, because these roles are not defined, well, I don't know, it just makes me think no wonder everybody's so confused. No wonder it's so confusing, one. And then two, it's very it feels very much like it's just on a whim how these are how are these roles being defined then? I mean, how are they? I mean, do you think there's I mean, I'm sure there's some element of it where there's a social script, like they're socially informed in some senses, right? But it's kind of a gamble, and also it feels like it's subject to change. Like it can always be rewritten, it can always be changed again if it needs to, because now, you know, we're not happy now again, you know. So I feel like that's interesting. I don't know. Do you have any other ideas about like how those roles would be defined now in this particular, you know?
Yeah, that's the part that even I'm still trying to figure out.
Yeah.
That is like, you know, I mean, it's very clear that we want to stay away from fundamentalism and all that stuff, all the things that came about with the critique of religion and everything. But um, ironically enough, like I said before, there is still uh, a spirit of fundamentalism within uh, the structure of dating itself. Just the aspect of not settling is an example. Um, it's completely fundamental not to settle. You know, we will go to the extremes of not to settle. We will rather die alone than to settle, right? I think a lot of people have expressed this before, right? Like, if I'm going to settle, then I rather just be alone, uh, and so on. So there are these aspects that exist, and it's funny that you say script, right? Um, and I guess that's why engagement and philosophical just conversations in general matter so much, because there's a script that we're reading, but we need to decipher exactly what that script is. Um, you know, there's been a script ever since we've deciphered the whole God is dead thing, or deconstructed God is dead and everything with Nietzsche, but uh, uh, we are still left with something that is existentially troubling, and so um, I think it's too big of a problem for me to answer uh, fully. But you know, I think that the thing is, we can point out that it is a problem.
Yeah.
You know.
Sorry, just give me 1 second. Um, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I don't think anyone knows exactly how these roles are being defined. I mean, I think because it's so particular, right, to each person, and I feel like now people are it's so much that people have to kind of figure out for themselves, and I think it's really good to figure things out for yourself. Like I think it's really good. It's really important to think for yourself, to really question your own premises, to really really dig deep into why do I think the way I think, why do I believe what I believe, why do I do what I do. But at the same time, it's almost I think it should be human in that in a sense though, where you do that work and then you return, you do that return to the given, but understanding why it is the way it is, like to see, oh, okay, there actually was some sort of reason for why this was the way it was, you know. And I think that, you know, you talked about like how it's true that like the if we think about like in a, at least if we're going to speak about like Christianity in the Western world, there's a sense of like obligations and forgiveness, but there's also, if we think about the proverbial aspects of the Bible, let's just talk about the Bible, which would really speak to any kind of, to many sacred texts, there's a sense of what is the good life, you know, how to live an abundant life, how to live a life that's not like always dealing with strife and drama. It's like that was also an aspect of why things were the way that they were. And I think if you're going to take that away, if you're going to completely kind of say, okay, we don't need that anymore, then I think, like you said, you kind of need to know, well, what are you replacing it with, and is it the same, if not better? Like, because isn't the goal that it would be better or something, I guess? But is it really better? And that could be the question, you know. So Yeah.
I also like to bring up the fact of like because I started thinking about sacrifice, right? And I was reading in Deleuze. Deleuze brings up this aspect of that Christianity kind of brings up the concept of this infinite debt, right? You could maybe this is like the correlation of like original sin, maybe. But what I'm trying to get at here is that even though our society now has likes to think that they have done away with religion, there is still this aspect of infinite debt that becomes dangerous without religion because now what we've done is the other person becomes the infinite debt,
Yes.
right? The other person meaning like, I know you're loving this. The other person, like, I mean, there's so many examples of just like, and you guys wrote a wonderful, you guys did a, well, first of all, you guys did a wonderful article on this, and you guys did a wonderful video on this. It's basically called the if you do X, you know, do X, and you if you do X, you
The
will love
formula
me.
for disaster.
Yeah, the formula for disaster. Yes. Um, and it's kind of like proving your love or whatever. um, this aspect of like prove your love to me, right? If you do X, this will mean that you love me. This is the infinite debt part, uh, and that's why I feel like even though a lot of people are against organized religion and everything, it's those unconscious concepts. Well, those used to be conscious concepts, now gone unconscious, that make it even more dangerous, more than ever, because uh, they are still living as there is an infinite uh, love bound to a finite being. Um, you could take the Jesus example. I think Jesus is a perfect example of this. uh, where it's like if you eradicate Jesus completely, they never eradicated the concept of a uh, you know a being, a human being with infinite love, you know, or something like that. You know, they eradicated organized religion, but they never eradicated the concepts that it uh, provided them, if that makes any sense. Uh, and now it's gone unconscious, so everyone's acting unconsciously. Um, and I feel like this plays a really huge role in the Western world. Even the aspect of sacrifice, I think the aspect of sacrificing is our new version of settling, right? Like, it's like you are sacrificing yourself like Jesus if you settle, right? And that's like horrible. Though, ironically enough, that for them it's horrible. Even though sacrifice used to be like the epitome of like uh, love to some degree. Just 1 second.
Right. Yeah, just 1 second. Just 1 second.
But I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
Sorry, my father-in-law stopped by.
Oh.
So yeah, I was gonna say, I think this is brilliant. I think this is such a great point, Javier, and I think in some ways, like maybe one could say, like, well, that's fine. We'll try harder. We'll just try to get these concepts and desires completely out of our system or something. But it's almost like I think this is how we're wired. Like I think this is an aspect of our humanity, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know that it can be or should be different. I don't know. I think that there's something, you know, while it's very hard, there's also something very beautiful about having these ways about these concepts, right, that we kind of uphold and still ascribe to, even though we've maybe admittedly or like extrinsically kind of said that we don't or we don't want to or something. We still hold them in our hearts. We still hold them in in our souls in a sense. And so I think I love what you said about Deleuze, and I think that, you know, this idea of like the, you know, it's almost like now.
Oh. Oh, there she is.
Sorry, Javier.
No, it's okay. You're good.
Okay, sorry about that. So basically, I was just gonna say, I think that's such a brilliant point that now we're just like, you know, people are just indebted to each other. You know, like there's still a concept of debt, and there's still a concept of, you know, recompense and stuff like that, but it ends up just becoming, you know, that the two people do this to one another. And I think there's a lot of you owe me this or you owe me that happens now, where it's more prevalent, and almost like that would make sense that it would be, and it's almost logical in the schema of thinking about, you know, relationships outside of a God context. Basically, like it would almost make logical sense that that's how it would have to be. But then it's like, does it work? Does it still work? Or does it end up just suffocating people? Because I think that there is a lot of, you know, like I said, I've done a lot of work in the past and have been wanting to kind of get back. I get back to it here and there, but this idea of like this work that I do on Flashlight, and the thing is that there's this idea of I think there's a lot of burden that people put on one another, and there's something that's great in some ways, because like at least maybe people feel like they feel like I'm carrying something finally, like maybe they felt numb or something, I don't know, they're like I'm carrying something, at least it's like I can feel this ownership of like this is mine, but yet the risk is that like you never know if it's just going to kind of completely fall out from your arms, because you know if it's not marriage, it's not certain, right? Like maybe the person will find someone else who's more attractive or who is more interesting, who is funnier or something like that. You know, I think there's a lot of, it's hard because it makes it so much harder to feel kind of a sense of sureness, I guess, in relationships in that way. And honestly, the person is, I don't know, there's just something very interesting. Like my mind keeps on going back to this whole like certainty, uncertainty, sureness or whatever, and unsure, you know, being unsure about things. And I feel like I need to draw a diagram. You know, me and diagrams with that, but I do think that's a very interesting concept, that there's still this great debt in a sense that we feel, and now we just attribute it to the person. And I think that's why two people maybe might be more susceptible to just sort of like switch out the relationship, because they're like, well, it's really just the other person's fault. Like and it might be, I'm not saying it's not necessarily, but a lot of times it can just be like, well, I don't know, it's almost like all of the sort of exchange is just between the two people, and how that like weighs up on a scale, basically. And there's a lot of like tit for tat, you know, there's a lot of like, well, I did this for you, you did it. There's a lot of that. So it's not like the scales are weighed by some higher sense of justice or even love or sacrifice. It's really just going to be between the two people, right? And that can feel like a seesaw. And they want the seesaw because they want movement. It feels like they want the dynamic movement, but also they want it to be equal. But if they were equal, then it's just kind of a standstill. So, sorry, just
Okay, we're probably gonna have to. I'll tell her that we'll cut this. Not cut this, but we'll have to finish up. We have to finish this up. Okay, let's see.
Sorry, Javier. I just like randomly clicked buttons and like.
That's okay. I think we're gonna tidy up soon.
Okay, sounds good.
It's already like 2 hours, and but what I wanted to tell you was that I don't think the concepts are bad to have.
Yeah, no,
It just
I
becomes
agree.
dangerous when we make them unconscious and we aim them at each other. Like the element of sacrifice that Christianity introduced, I think is good, except when we get rid of uh, God and religion and all that, we're still carrying the concept of sacrifice, except now we aim it at each other and go, and it brings out the formula of disaster, right? Like you need to sacrifice yourself for my happiness. Except we're both saying that to each other. You need to sacrifice yourself for my happiness. Um, and we're both implicitly doing that, and unconsciously doing that. So I think
Yeah,
that's the element for me that gets very dangerous because we're still carrying around this element of sacrifice within us, which I think is fine. But when we direct at each other, that is not. Uh, no human being can carry that burden.
yeah, absolutely. And also, like, it's weird. We have a ambivalent relationship with sacrifice, right? Like you mentioned, like it's almost like we believe in it when it benefits us, but not. But then we also are very critical of like, well, you shouldn't be sacrificing. You shouldn't be like being a doormat. You shouldn't be you shouldn't have to be serving that person. Da da da. And so I think we have a very ambivalent, uncertain. It's almost like it got pushed into the unconscious, and it's like in terms of us not consciously kind of ascribing to it, and yet like now we don't. It's almost like it got muddled there. It's very hard to see because it's almost like it's here, and you're like, it's there in the background, but like I can't see it, so I can't really sort it out. If I could see it, if I could like look at it, then I could at least sort of sort it out and know what I like. What do I think about it? What do I, what's exactly like my paradigm regarding it or axioms regarding it or something? It's very interesting. I feel like we've got an ambivalent relationship to sacrifice. You know. And like you're saying about like, well, they should sacrifice themselves for me. Why should you sacrifice it? Like if they should do that for you, then why shouldn't you do that for them? But if there's no sort of, you know, whereas like in religion, there would be at least a sense of like, well, we actually, kind of, we serve unto God in this kind of like, sort of sense of serving the kingdom, something greater, higher, bigger. And then in that service to God, we do acts of service for one another. But because it's very mutual, then both people are in a sense served as well. So that's kind of how I think things were, more or less. That's maybe very rough, and I'm sure there are ways in which that obviously could be abused, but that there was a way in which that was a structure for the sense of being served and serving, and also having an orientation of that service, so that it wasn't actually just about like, the scale between these two people, right? There was a greater service that you knew that was toward. So now it's kind of like we kind of see sacrificing ourselves, like in a way, I think maybe people think of sacrificing themselves as bad because it sort of like doesn't fit the whole self-care, self-ambitions type of narrative. But we also want people to be sacrificial in their relationally. I think there's some confusion there for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, the element of sacrifice.
Sorry, Javier. I don't know if I was muted or not. I'm just making sure my phone's plugged in. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, no problem.
You've been so kind to entertain a very entertaining, very, I don't know, some might call it entertainment, some might call it distracting. So
I thought it was entertaining. But I think we'll tie it off there.
Okay.
If you have any last remarks or anything, I'll let you have the last word, and then we'll just cut it there.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being willing to entertain the conversation. I think you're asking really great questions and making really great points. And yeah, I guess it's kind of like, honestly, my question just like that I'm still contemplating has to do with like your bigger project of considering like what does it mean to return to home, the discussion you, Cadell, and Daniel and I had on like your chat because it's like for people who have seen very like traumatic situations in their parents or in marriages that they've known personally, then what is like, how does one maybe they're like, okay, I want to do this cool, like, well, you can maybe feel like, okay, I want to do this hard, cool adventure that is marriage, but how do, like, because I'm just still thinking about like, how does one get themselves equipped for that, and it's probably just to think on things like what is a good life. Think about it. What is your metaphysical understanding of of God, or the infinite, or not? I mean, but just to have an understanding of that, I think that could maybe help somebody. That's my only thoughts initially. Good. I'm so glad you can get the stuff. That's great. So that's what I would say. But yeah, again, thank you. This is very very enjoyable. I enjoy talking about it a lot.
It was enjoyable too. I enjoyed everything that occurred. That was probably the most unorthodox way of live streaming, or not. I don't know, but I think we really brought the liveness to the streaming.
We're gonna talk about adventure and the uncertainty.
Yeah.
This is it. This is it. So.
And your daughter just like giving me the thumbs up. That made my day right there. That was so funny. She's like, oh, mom's just running off to talk to the neighbors real quick, and then she's just like, yee.
That is hilarious. I love that so much.
Funny. I'm gonna go back this video just to screenshot that moment. And I'm gonna post it on my story because I think it's so funny and so perfect.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Oh yeah. And it's funny because I was like, as I put my glasses on, Reed was like trying to put on his glasses. So this is just so funny. It's like, anyways, lots of entertainment, lots of stuff over this side. Thank you so much for your kindness and for your patience as well with all of it. So thanks.
No worries. All right.
Now I'll give the thumbs up.
All right. So I'm gonna cut it, and then we can still talk if you want.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Javier.
See you guys later. Bye.
Bye.